Welcome to Wine for Normal People, the podcast for people who like wine, but not the snobbery that goes with it. I'm your host, Elizabeth Schneider, author of the Wine for Normal People book and certified wine dork. This podcast is brought to you by Wine Access. Go to wineaccess.com/WFMP. Get into the site and browse their amazing curated selection. Their wine experts taste thousands of wines a year, and only the best make the cut. Check it out today, wineaccess.com/WFMP. And if you want to join my wine club and get 6 bottles of wine selected by me for $150, go to wineaccess.com/normal. Listen in the middle of the show for more details. I know that I said I was done with Bordeaux. I know that many of you may think I have an addiction issue to Bordeaux. Kind of do. I'm hoping to spread it to you as well because it really is so fantastic. And when I tell you about Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, if you don't listen to anything more than this, I'm going to give you the soundbite. This is the place that has high quality, affordable wines, amazing value. And if you bring it to somebody for less than $30, you can get an amazing bottle and they will think it costs hundreds of dollars because it's so good and totally underrated. This is one of the oldest areas in Bordeaux. So if you turn off the podcast in the next 5 minutes, just remember, support the producers of Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, and it will make you look so good when you give that as a gift to someone. I will say, poor Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, and they're next to each other. Canon Fronsac is much smaller, and there really isn't one that's better than the other, and I will explain why in the show. Although for many years people said Canon Fronsac was better, it's not necessarily true, so that's another maybe soundbite to take away with you. I will say, these poor producers, they have been working their butts off to try to bring this appellation back to great status. Because for a long time, it was better or better renowned than Saint-Émilion and Pomerol, the other two really big right bank appellations now. It's just a question of history, bad timing, bad luck. But these producers have been on the precipice of breakthrough for so long. It's just sad that it hasn't happened. But you know what that means. That means if we know about it and other people don't know about it, you know, there's not that many of us. We could totally corner the market on Fronsac. After you hear about these areas, you're going to be very excited to try the wines. And patrons, I think I will do a mini class on Fronsac and Canon Fronsac if you're a wine lover plus. So speaking of patrons, I do need to thank the new patrons as I do every week. I am so grateful to you. I can't do the show without you. I was just looking at the list. I can't believe how many people joined in 2018 from the jump. I need to do some sort of event for you guys. It's just amazing that you've stuck around this long. And I want to thank everybody who's been around for that long and who has continued to believe in what I do. The show has changed, but I'm so glad that you still feel that it's worthy of supporting. Maybe I'll do a special thing in episode 600, which is coming up. Crazy. I'm organizing for that now. So let me thank the new patrons: Patty M., Matthew R., Gabriella M., Patrick Michael B., Lynn, Apurva S., Denise L., Ted F., Alex P., Abby C., Grace, and Rob H. Thank you so much for being new patrons. I encourage you immediately when you get onto the site to go into the chats and start interacting with everybody. It'll pull you right into the community. And if you're a patron, you can do live events, including the one in Raleigh, which is coming up, which I am hosting. So let's get to Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. I just loved researching this region. I don't know why I don't know more about this. I mean, I guess that's testament. Because I'm a wine dork and I love reading about this stuff, I know something about most of these regions, but I don't know how it escaped me that these are regions that at one point were the greats. They're not now, so I can't really include them in the series. I was going to call this show like the should be greats, but let me cut to the chase here. 44.5 degrees north latitude. Most of Bordeaux is around there, just west of the city of Libourne. And this area is right close to Pomerol, to Saint-Émilion. These are the big names. These are the greats. And it's just 35 kilometers northeast from Bordeaux. It's got the right placement. But that doesn't always mean, like, just because it's close to stuff doesn't always mean that the terroir is going to translate through. But in this case, it does. And as I said, the wines are extremely high quality and great values. And another thing they have going for them, which may be the tipping point that makes these wines famed again, they stay bright and acidic and fresh tasting even in hot years due to the soil types and the climate and a bunch of other factors, which I'll discuss. I think we should all be drinking these wines. They have tons of fruit and yet this contrast of tannin, acidity, things that make them really, really high quality wines. So Fronsac and Canon Fronsac have minor terroir differences between them. Fronsac is in the north mainly, Canon Fronsac is in the south. Both are on the right bank of the Dordogne River. They both lie on the plateaus and hills, and both are red wine only AOCs, appellations d'origine contrôlées. Canon Fronsac is smaller. So I'm going to do a comparison of the two later so we can get an idea. But I do want you to think about these as not one is better than the other. The terroir is so similar. So the only difference is if you get a Canon Fronsac, it's smaller, so it may be more consistent if you don't know producers. But I'm going to give you the names of many producers. The question becomes, as I am being the hype woman for these should-be greats of Bordeaux, why don't we know these appellations more? The evidence that I have is pretty clear. Fronsac and Canon Fronsac Chateau export about 25% of their production to China, to the US, Germany, Belgium, the UK. Those are the top 5 markets. Most other regions in Bordeaux export 40%. So they are behind in terms of renown and demand, which is what they're going to need to bounce back into that position of the greats. Let's go over the history. A geographer, Henri Engelbert, said that Fronsac was the historic cradle of Great Bordeaux and Libourne wines. It is because, first of all, people have been in this area since Paleolithic and Neolithic times. It's been continuously occupied since the Iron Age. So long history of habitation here. And it makes sense. We're on a river. It's pretty good conditions for growing things. When people started to settle, that's what they were looking for. Fronsac is at a strategic military and trade position. It's where 2 rivers meet. So the ancient Romans were all over this. They were eager to conquer it. They began cultivating vines. They had the belief, and this is probably because they started in what is now Italy, that hillsides were the only right place to plant vines. Now, we've since then changed a little bit because if you look at the entire left bank of Bordeaux, and you can go back and listen to the whole series that's still available for everybody because a year of the podcasts are available for free. After that, you've got to become a patron for the back catalog. But the left bank of Bordeaux is drained by the Dutch, and it's flat for the most part. I mean, there's some rolling hills, but it's flat. The Romans, knowing that in Italy, the river valleys and the valleys in Italy really don't produce good wine, that is still the case today. It's mostly true almost everywhere. There are a few places that prove that wrong in Europe. So the Romans had it right, and they really, really liked Fronsac and Canon Fronsac because it's sloping land. After the Romans and all of the stuff that happened, the fallout after the Romans, from the 8th century on, Fronsac emerged as a stopping off point for pilgrims going to Santiago de Compostela on El Camino. I keep talking about this when I discuss Bordeaux, but it is really important because in this case and in all other cases, the monasteries were hosting pilgrims. They made wine. The Romans started viticulture, at least in earnest. The monasteries and monks really perfected it in the 700s. In 769, Charlemagne came to crush a revolt in Fronsac. His military leaders looked around and said, oh my God, this is an amazing strategic military position. And so they started to construct a fortress, a castrum, over Roman fortifications that were already there. The Romans already knew that this was a great area. Charlemagne's army created this fortress. At that point, Fronsac was called Francius, the camp of the Franks is what it translated to, and eventually the name became Fronsac. This move of Charlemagne setting up the strategic position then poured enormous wealth into Fronsac. 11th and 12th century churches and limestone houses are still there. Spoiler alert here, a lot of limestone soils here. I'm going to be talking about that in a second, but this was a very important place for people to live. And from 1152 to 1453, during the 3 centuries of English occupation, Fronsac was exported to England. It was very well known there. It was demanded. In 1633, the Cardinal de Richelieu, the chief minister to King Louis XIII of France, acquired the Duchy of Fronsac for his family. And they held that for a very long time. And in the 1700s, in the 18th century, his great-grandnephew inherited the Duchy of Fronsac, built a giant theater there to entertain the visiting court of King Louis XIV, and they brought all of Fronsac's wines back to the court of Versailles. So Fronsac became very well known, very coveted, and the drink of kings. By the mid-1700s, nobles from the city of Libourne settled on the hillsides. They improved winemaking. They made great wines. This was before the Médoc and the left bank was drained as it was being developed. This was the most coveted place, the most prized, and most established. And from the mid-18th century to the start of the 19th century, global maritime trade helped Fronsac. The wines were exported all over. Top estates in Fronsac and Canon Fronsac were better known and often sold for more money than the wines of Saint-Émilion through the 1700s until the 1800s. And in the 19th century, now we start to see some people purchasing vineyards in Canon Fronsac and building that out and looking for a separation. In the late 19th century, as in all of France, all of Europe, phylloxera hit. This is the root louse that destroys vineyards. The vines on limestone soils, which is where the majority of high-quality vines are planted in Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, did not survive. Only the ones that were on sand, which phylloxera does not like and can't live in, only those vineyards survived. The problem is alluvial sand is not good for vines. It creates very washed out, pale, and not very tasty wines. After phylloxera, a lot of regions bounced back, but Fronsac just didn't fully recover, which is a shame given the pedigree that I've just told you about. They still made wine. In the 1900s, actually, Malbec was the big grape, and it's now making a comeback. The appellation was granted for, it was called Côte de Fronsac in 1937. In 1976, it just became Fronsac. Côte de Canon Fronsac in the southern portion of Fronsac was granted in 1939, so 2 years later, and simplified to Canon Fronsac in 1964. From the beginning of the appellation system, almost from the very beginning, these two appellations were considered to be separate. World War II came, Saint-Émilion became hugely famous for the wine, for the beautiful tourist city, for the history. Pomerol then started to rise for wine quality and the scarcity. In the second half of the 20th century, we had new technology, change in winemaking. And in Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, we had outside investment. About 50% of Fronsac vineyards are now owned by investors. French investors, Chinese investors, American investors, lots of outside investment in Fronsac, and yet it doesn't really seem to be paying off that much in terms of reputation. A lot of times those people have a different way of marketing things than the native Bordelais, and that can help, but that has not really been the case. And it's in spite of the fact that there is so much talk since the late 1990s. Fronsac and Canon Fronsac have been the upcoming appellations. These are the ones to watch. These are the ones that are going to be huge. And they just haven't lived up to that potential. I'll give you two stories. One is Michel Roland, the very famous consultant, owns a chateau here, Chateau Fontenille. The wines are like $300. He is very committed. He's not going anywhere. The wines command that price because of him. Christian Moex of Petrus bought property in Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, said that he loved the wines, but he couldn't make it work from a business standpoint, so he sold the chateau. This added to the anticipation that this was going to be a big thing for Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. It just never happened. So these wines now, despite the fact that they're so good, are very much under the radar. Interesting story. And now I hope you are all looking up Fronsac and Canon Fronsac and trying to figure out which bottles to buy. Just wait till the end when I tell you the producers, because that'll help a lot. The issues for Canon Fronsac, like, again, it's a little bit head scratchy, but these wines are consistently really great. They're complex, they're fruity, they have tons of flavor. I have never had a bad Fronsac or Canon Fronsac. I can't say the same for many other Bordeaux appellations. It's small but mighty. Their wines are affordable. If you happen to be in Bordeaux, there are great tourist opportunities. They want to welcome you, but it's just not as visited or well-known as Saint-Émilion and Pomerol, which have the status, the name, and Saint-Émilion certainly has the history and reasons to go visit. It's a catch-22 as they're trying to be more visible, but they can't get a lot of money for their wines. No money in, they can't invest in people, in technology. That's going to show up in terms of how prominent they are, how much they can do with the wine. Could they make it a little bit better so it starts scoring big scores? It could. When people do invest, drives up the land prices and then changes the vibe of this more rural town. Fronsac has some challenges. Let's go to terroir. And I am going to say this again. I will discuss the differences between Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, but mostly a lot of it is the same. Because I'm such a dork, I looked at the Cahier des Charges, the official AOC document for both of these appellations, and they are so similar. The history is the same. A lot of the terroir is the same. Minor differences, as I said before, but mostly these are hillside appellations. They have plateaus and terraces. They are northwest of Saint-Émilion. Fronsac is in the north. Canon Fronsac is in the south of this little duo, and it's not a very big area. As I mentioned, it's at the confluence of two rivers, the Dordogne, which comes in from the Massif Central in the middle of France. It's on the right bank of the Dordogne. And then inside of the appellation, there is a river called the Isle River. The Isle River runs between Fronsac and Pomerol and Saint-Émilion. So it kind of separates them out. And that is another maybe little bit of a problem. I don't know. I mean, what it does is it sort of sets them apart. Oh, well, you have to go across the river to get to those. So Pomerol and Saint-Émilion are together, and then Fronsac and Canon Fronsac are a little bit apart because you have to go across the river. So maybe psychologically there's something about that too. I'm not sure. The Cahier des Charges is very specific. You can only put vineyards on hillsides. And yes, the best vineyards are away from the Dordogne. The grapes have to be, according to the document, they have to be a certain distance from the alluvial soils close to the banks of the Dordogne. And they have to be on sloping higher land. This is all in the legal document. Good for them for really trying to regulate to the extent that they can quality in the wines. The climate is similar to all of the places on the right bank. It's moderate oceanic climate. And like all of Bordeaux, it's unpredictable because it's an oceanic climate. So vintage always is going to matter here. You don't know, is there going to be problems during flowering? Will there be issues of rain in the fall? Will it be very hot during the summer? Will there be drought? Long, hot summers, warm falls, and then you have mild, generally dry winters. It's not too wet and it's not too dry. Very Goldilocks here. There's enough rain for healthy vines. The soil types here are the thing that we're going to get to. They retain water when it's important, but because of the slope and because of the type of soils, limestone in particular, it's going to drain off. And with climate change and these really unpredictable heavy rains, erratic weather, this is an asset that almost all of the vines are on at least some slope. Again, there's a plateau. So I'm not saying that they're all on sloping land, but they're at elevation and they've got limestone soils, which is going to drain off the heavy rains. The two rivers protect from spring frost. So it never gets really that cold here. And there are so many microclimates because there's lots of hills. Those microclimates wind up promoting slower ripening in the warm, hot seasons. Each hill has its own little microclimate, and the wines seem to maintain acidity because of the cooler soils, because of these cooler microclimates, and that's going to build flavor over the course of a growing season. As I've just said, you have plateaus, you have slopes, you have foothills, The terrain in Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, we're not talking about flat as a pancake, left bank Bordeaux with lovely soil types, but really nothing to look at. This is rugged terrain. There's these rocky outcroppings called tertres. And the highest one is Tertre de Fronsac, 76 meters or 250 feet, overlooking the Isle Valley and the Dordogne Valley. These are the river valleys. The elevations go up to more than 50 meters or 165 feet. That's great for ripening. That also prevents frost as the cool air drains off the slopes and into the valleys. Good elevation, especially when we consider that a lot of Bordeaux does not have any hills to speak of. We'll take a step away from the podcast to thank our sponsors this week. First of all, Wine Access, wineaccess.com/WFNP is how you will get into Wine Access's site. Let them know you found out about them through me, and you will go and look at their selection. They have a collection of standing favorites. They have wines that change all the time. They're constantly being presented with new wines, but only take a very small portion of them for the site. Going to wineaccess.com/WFNP is like walking into a wine shop where everything has been picked out for you and they're all great. You can't go wrong. And the customer service is phenomenal. I hear this again and again and again. They will always make it right if something goes wrong, but that is a rare occasion. They have a buy and hold feature where you can buy a bottle and then you have a month to get to the $150 free shipping threshold. So you can buy something and then a new wine will come up in the next couple of days or weeks. And if you get to $150, which is really not that hard to do, you can get free shipping. That saves a ton of money. Check it out today, wineaccess.com/WFNP. And of course, I need to give my shameless plug for Patreon. This podcast could not exist without patrons. patreon.com/wine for normal people is how you can join the community. You can check it out for free at first if you want, and then join for just $3 a month, or there's a 10% discount if you join for the year. And you get a shout out on the podcast if you join for a year or two. It's great. There's lots of perks and tons of live events going on, so you can actually drink wine with very cool people, opportunities to go on trips to Italy with me and maybe some other destinations in the future. Also, don't forget the Wine for Normal People classes, winefornormalpeople.com/classes. Coming up, California versus Burgundy. If you really want an in-depth study about the differences between Burgundy and California, why these wines are so different, I have that for you. And also the greats of Bordeaux. If you're interested, that's going to be one of 3 classes in that series. And if you have never taken a class before and you're interested, Wines of France is a great intro to the spiritual home of wine. So check it out today, winefornormalpeople.com/classes. And now let's get back to the show. And now we get to the soil types. The soils here are mainly limestone. This is some of the best limestone terroir of Bordeaux and certainly of the right bank. Cool soils, that's going to matter in hot vintages. You're going to get more balance, more acidity. And there are 3 main types of soils. Only 2 are really important. There is one area of heavy clay with a little bit of limestone. That is less prominent. The big soil type here is the Molasses de Fronsac. This is clay limestone soil. It's on the slopes and in the valleys and the hills, and this is the oldest soil geologically. It has eroded. That means when I say sand, we're talking about these coarse sand pockets of limestone. Some sandstone, some sandy clay, but a lot of that has calcareous or limestone elements in it. This is the majority of the soils, mixture of limestone and clay, sands that are made up of limestone particles, sometimes mixed with sandstone, very well drained. And then there's another limestone called Asturias limestone. This is a harder limestone. This runs across both Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, and you'll find both clay limestone and limestone soils on the plateau in both appellations. This is similar to the limestone that you'll find in Saint-Émilion. There are fossils in Asturias limestone. It's calcareous. There's sand, and it's covered with sandy clay or gravel. These 2 soil types are the secret weapon for Fronsac because limestone always seems to bring acidity aromatic complexity and elegance to the grapes that grow on them and in the resulting wines. They are blessed with a soil type that maybe right now they're not known or praised, but limestone is going to be a huge asset in the future as the climate warms and things change. One thing about Canon Fronsac and Fronsac, part of their wine law since 2011, they amended the Cahier des Charges to put specifications and environmental measures that make illegal use of certain chemicals and put in place things like planting grass on headlands to stop erosion, other land regeneration measures. Right now, 85% of wine estates in both appellations are committed to environmental certifications at the vineyard level, not at the winery level, but at the vineyard level. That's a good start. And 30% of the land is certified organic or in the process of being certified. And 70% is HVE, high environmental value. This is a European certification, really important and something that is well respected. So sustainability is a big part of this appellation. Again, they've got all the things going for them. Let's do a little comparison. I keep saying that Canon Fronsac and Fronsac are very similar. The main things are the following. Canon Fronsac is in the southwest tip of Fronsac. It's still part of Fronsac, so it's kind of like a sub-appellation. It is way smaller. It's a little bit closer to the river. Some parts are a little bit higher and some parts have less clay and more limestone. So in the past, people said, oh, well, these wines are much more elegant and they're more age-worthy. And pretty much no one says that anymore. If you read notes of tastings, everyone says that stylistically, there is no way to tell between Canon Fronsac and Fronsac in a blind tasting. That should give you an indication of how close these wines are. The overall quality has improved so much for both appellations that we just don't see this big difference anymore. And all around, it's a lot better. You're not going to get bad wines out of this appellation. And although Canon Fronsac is smaller and maybe there is more limestone, Fronsac is really great. The chateaux that are clustered around the city of Saint-Émilion are not near Canon Fronsac, and they are considered as good as and better often than the wines of Canon Fronsac. So we can just say that these are superficial differences, but really we should just lump these two together. Still, for thoroughness, I'm going to do the numbers just to give you a sense of how much bigger Fronsac is and how many more bottles. It's a lot. And do some of the elevation differences just so you can get a sense for this. But like I said, please keep in mind, not so different as I'm telling you this, except in size. Fronsac is 800 hectares or almost 2,000 acres spread over 7 municipalities. So it is quite large. Canon Fronsac is 250 hectares or 620 acres of vines. Fronsac is about 3.5 times the size of Canon Fronsac. Canon Fronsac is south of the Fronsac appellation. It's one of the smallest appellations in Bordeaux, mostly adjacent to the Dordogne River, and it only includes 2 communes versus the 7 in Fronsac. That means Fronsac's going to be more variable because it's larger. Still only 2,000 acres, not that much. Fronsac has 100 wine growers. Canon Fronsac has 40 wine growers. In both cases, most of these wine growers are families. Most are multi-generational. There is some outside investment. Like I said, that doesn't mean they're not family owned, but it probably means they're not multi-generational. The average size of the property, though, is pretty much the same. Fronsac, it's about 8 hectares or 20 acres. And in Canon Fronsac, 6 hectares or 15 acres. And the production is very different. 5 million bottles for Fronsac and about 1.7 million bottles for Canon Fronsac. So smaller quantity. And then when we get into the land, there isn't a huge difference. If you look at elevation, for instance, Fronsac goes from 40 to about 80 meters, 130 to 265 feet in elevation. Great for water drainage. We have the 2 types of limestone soils I mentioned before here. There's slopes and hills in Fronsac. And we see the same thing in Canon Fronsac. They are based around one of the rocky outcrops, the Terroir de Canon, and they're at elevations of 50 to 87 meters or 165 to 285 feet. Here's the thing. Because Canon Fronsac is smaller, likely it's going to be more consistent. I say the same thing about Barbaresco and Barolo. But you would be hard-pressed to find people saying that Barolo is much worse than Barbaresco because it's bigger. So let's put it in context there. Fronsac is not much worse because it's bigger. Traditionally, Canon Fronsac, people have said, is better, but the village called Saint-Émilion in Fronsac, and it is some of the best chateau in Fronsac, bottles that are getting $300 and $400 a bottle. So it's not universally better. If you go to a wine shop that you trust and you see a Fronsac, likely they tasted it and they think it's pretty good. And these bottles are generally less than $30 and they are really excellent. So what's in them? Like, what are the grapes? What are the blends? It's the same as everything else on the right bank. The legal documents are a little bit strange in France, I think, to us as wine drinkers, because what they specify is first what the vineyard area has to be planted with. So 80% of the vineyard area, not the blend, but the vineyard area, has to be the main grape varieties. And those main grape varieties are Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and Cabernet Sauvignon, and now Malbec, or Co, as they call it here. 80% of the vineyard has to be planted with those grapes. And then there are what they call accessory grapes. These are like seasoning or spices that you can add to the dish, so to speak, less than or equal to 10% of the vineyard area, Petit Verdot and Carmenere. So that is all that is allowed in both Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. And in the wine, those main grape varieties, Merlot, Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, and Malbec, have to be in combination of at least 50% or more in the blend. So you can't have 100% Petit Verdot or Carmenere. Those are maxed out at 50%. But given that only 10% of the vineyard area is Carmenere or Petit Verdot, you likely will not have enough grapes to make any quantity of wine that those are going to constitute more than 50% of the blend. Anyway, just math. In reality, Merlot makes up nearly 80% of the vineyards. This is an early ripening grape. It thrives in the cool soils, those clay limestone soils, so ideal for getting rich, flavorful Merlot that makes these wines with just so much complexity. And yet they're fruity and really approachable, and they don't need a ton of age. Cabernet Franc is almost 15%. That's on limestone soils or on sand, a little bit less finicky than Merlot. Merlot currently is suffering. Merlot does not like hot weather. It is a picky grape. It is hard to grow because it's not doing well in the heat and with the mildews from unpredictable rains. Cabernet Franc is replacing Merlot. Cabernet Franc does better with heat, and it is much hardier. It's been around a long time, and it's birthed many grapes, including its most famous child, Cabernet Sauvignon, which is 5% of plantings. Cabernet Sauvignon is late ripening. It is really just for those portions of Fronsac and Canon Fronsac that are hot and dry, usually clay sand or exposed clay limestone soils where it is not appropriate to grow Merlot or Cabernet Franc. Merlot and Cabernet Franc like cooler soils. They like cooler spots. Cabernet Sauvignon likes heat. That's what you do with your hotter sites. You give it to Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, another thing that has changed with Fronsac recently is that Malbec is now making a comeback. It's the fourth most planted grape variety in these two regions. It also thrives in limestone, in clay gravel, in clay limestone. It's more versatile. More is being planted now. It went away really after there was a deep frost in 1956 in Saint-Émilion and on the right bank, actually, in all of Bordeaux. And they decided not to replant Carmenere and Malbec because they were always very difficult to grow in cooler weather. That's changing now. So now we're bringing more Malbec into the blend. But as I said before, Fronsac and Canon Fronsac have a lot going for them in terms of positioning against climate change. Cool soils, cooler microclimates, fresh and acidic grapes that have complexity. They're making wines that taste great now. They're better with age. The wines can age anywhere from 8 years to about 15 years if they're of high quality. They're not drink now wines, but they've been known to age more than 20 years. It just depends on the producer and the terroir. They are well positioned to maintain acidity where that may be dropping off in other wines in other parts of Bordeaux. If we think about the blends and what each grape brings, Merlot is going to be used for color, for alcohol, for aromatic complexity, ripe red and black fruit. And then for the texture, it's smooth, it's supple, it's silky, it's velvety, it's so round in your mouth. It's an amazing grape. And it needs a little bit of help. 100% Merlot can be tough unless it's growing on the perfect soils. Cab Franc is there to add acidity, which Merlot sometimes lacks, spice, earthiness, this little grounding note to it, and the tannin factor, which is really important. So if you have a Merlot and Cabernet Franc blend, you'll have red fruit, and then you'll have floral notes from the Cab Franc. You'll have spiciness also from the Cab Franc. It might be earthy from both grapes. Tea-like is a Cabernet Franc addition, and then those softer tannins. So Cab Franc will add more tannin to Merlot. Merlot will soften the tannins in Cabernet Franc, and great acidity from the Cabernet Franc. And that's the majority of the blends of Merlot and Cabernet Franc. If you have Cabernet Sauvignon is used for richness, for color, complexity, tannin. And if you want a wine that's going to age, it's going to age better if you add some Cabernet Sauvignon into the blend. If you have a Merlot Cabernet Sauvignon blend with no Cab Franc, these wines are going to be bigger. They'll be more similar to wines you'll find on the left bank. They'll have dark fruit. They may be woodsy. They may have things like tobacco. They're definitely going to have bigger tannins and notes from the oak like chocolate and vanilla and mocha. That's the effect of Cabernet Sauvignon and its interaction with wood. And then Malbec is being used again for tannic structure. It's making this comeback because it's not so warm that we're baking out the tannin in Malbec. It is providing good tannic structure, black and red fruit again, and then some interesting things like licorice notes and anise and sometimes truffle notes, sometimes mineral notes or gamey notes, kind of like animal-like notes, which is really pleasant against Merlot's real softness, silkiness, and fruitiness. If you get these blends, you can get new combinations. They're herbal. They can be medium to full-bodied. You get all sorts of new notes with time and different body depending on what the blend is. In general, when you get a Fronsac or Canon Fronsac wine from a good producer, you should expect it to be pretty dark in color with red and black fruit. It should be spicy. It should be a little earthy. If it has age or has been in oak barrel, it may be a leathery. It's medium to full bodied, but always with a great tannic structure that balances all that fruit and specifically acidity, complexity, but then enough so that it's not heavy. Apart from the blend percentages that I talked about, the main versus accessory grape, there aren't a whole lot of winemaking rules. There's no aging requirements that they have to be in oak. They just can't be released until June 1st after the harvest. Most of the producers are aging in some sort of oak barrel, but what that is just depends. And this is why producers are important to pay attention to. I will tell you a couple of things. There are amazing producers in Canon Fronsac, Au Mazerie, Chateau Gaby, which is actually owned by an American. And then you have Fronsac, I already mentioned, Chateau Fontenelle, owned by Michel Roland, Chateau de Carles, Chateau d'Alem, La Villard, La Rivière. But what I want you to do actually is to look up something called Expression de Fronsac. This is an association that was started in 1988. There are 12 chateaux that are members, and these are high quality estates that are doing joint marketing, exchanging best practices. Most of the names that I just mentioned, plus more, are on there. I will include the link in the show notes. And if you get a wine from this association, you're going to do pretty well. I will also tell you that at least in the US, as I was looking at wines here, most of the 12 chateaux are what you can get from Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. There's a couple other ones that you can get, but those are really the ones to look out for. Other great producers, I have to give a shout out to Sally Evans, Chateau George Set, which is her fairly new venture. She started in 2018. She was on talking about vegetarian food pairings with Bordeaux. She is fantastic. If you do go to Fronsac, you should absolutely visit her. I can't wait to taste her food. Someday I have not visited her yet. Chateau Canon, Chateau Lagrave, Chateau Moulin au La Roque. These are fantastic producers. And like I said, they are very tourist friendly. And they are also part of the Saint-Émilion and Pomerol Fronsac wine route. So check it out. Definitely go see my friend Sally, though, at Chateau George Set. Pairings, This is going to be pretty much the same for almost all red Bordeaux, but these wines are a little bit bigger. So just make sure you don't do anything too light. Like you want to do aged cheeses or more flavorful cheeses and harder cheeses like Comté, roasted or grilled red meats or vegetables, lamb. Game is recommended. Ratatouille, if you're familiar with that lovely French dish. Roasted or grilled chicken for some of these lighter styles, but you want something that has some preparation to it, has some oomph. You don't want lighter fare with these wines. They are pretty powerful. The last note that I'll make before I sign off is that there are whites in increasing quantities being made in both Canon Fronsac and Fronsac, and by all accounts, they're great. You have to look for the Chateau name, though, because now there's Bordeaux Blanc AOC, there's Grave, Pessac Léonon, a bunch of the Côte de Bordeaux are allowed to make Blanc, Entrée du Mer, and now we have Médoc Blanc, which was just activated last year. But the whites of Fronsac and Canon Fronsac will not say that. They will say Bordeaux Blanc AOC, and then you'll have to do this by the Chateau. I've just given you some names. You can look up Expression de Fronsac, and that should give you a good start to what some of these great producers are. That is Canon Fronsac and Fronsac. Some of you really love the Bordeaux series. I guess if you didn't love it, you wouldn't have made it to the end of the show. But I think that these appellations deserve a look from us. I will certainly be concentrating on them a little bit more now. I hope that this has been either rediscovery or a discovery of a new region for you to check out. If you're a fan of Bordeaux, probably even if you're just a fan of Merlot, these wines are exceptional and they're at a fantastic price. They're a little bit harder to find in the US, easier to find in the UK, given the history and the fact that the UK has always loved the wines of Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, but they are worth seeking out. They're worth giving a try. They certainly are more affordable than Pomerol, Saint-Émilion, because it is so large. There are many price points for it. But given the small size, there's more consistency in both Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. I wonder if now that we're at the end of the show, you are having the same thought process that I had, which is, I can't believe that we get so set on this is the greatest wine right now. In the past, the landscape of wine looked so very different. And so this sort of harkens back to last week's show. We don't know what the future is going to hold and who are going to be the big names of the future. But I would probably put money on Fronsac and Canon Fronsac at some point. Then again, I'd be like every other wine writer and critic for the last 30 years. So maybe I shouldn't say that. There's been a significant change because of climate change. So we can keep our fingers crossed and hope that now is the time for these really historic and once great appellations to seize the moment and to rise to the level that they can and should. That is my inspiring message on Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. We're running out of Bordeaux appellations. I've got a couple more. I know you thought I was done. This is an almost great. So yeah, the greats are done. But almost greats and maybe some larger appellations that we need to look at. Not done yet. My love affair with Bordeaux goes on. Hopefully yours has been sparked and it goes on too. With that, this has been another episode of Wine for Normal People. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.